I think one of the main reasons I'm drawn to RPGs is because they can create worlds that feel real and lived in. Worlds that have nuances and problems that are relatable to the real world. But creating a universe that's both interesting and approachable can be a difficult balancing act. On the one hand, you don't want to build a world that's so complex that the player has no idea what's going on. But you also don't want to build a world that's so focused on a single concept that the whole thing just feels one-dimensional. And I feel like a lot of games fall into one of these two categories. The politics of Morrowind were so convoluted and confusing that I never really understood what was going on. The whole thing was just such a mess that I stopped caring and ended up focusing on other things the game had to offer. But at the other end of the extreme, Dragon Age Origins was so focused on the fight with the Darkspawn that nothing else really seemed to matter, and I quickly lost interest in the game's setting. So how do we deal with this problem? We need a way to create deep and involving worlds that are still simple enough on the surface to be understood by a new player. Something that gets you right into the action, but leaves a lot to be uncovered. Well, I recently realized that two of my favorite world-building games actually use a very similar strategy. Those two games being Gothic and Fallout New Vegas. I'm going to call their strategy the three-camp system, and in this video, I'm going to explain what it is and why it works. It's a really elegant solution to a lot of problems that RPGs create, and I think we can learn a lot about RPG design by looking at how it works. The three-camp system is a strategy for world design where you build the game society around three main factions, or camps. Each of these factions should be of critical importance to the world's social, economic, and political structure, and the player should have a large number of opportunities to interact with each group directly, either in the form of individual quest lines or large sections of the main story. Let's take a look at how New Vegas and Gothic fit into this system. In Gothic, the three camps are the Old Camp, the New Camp, and the Swamp Camp. The Old Camp is the game's most dominant faction. They control the ore trade with a king and the largest mine, giving them an unmatched level of power and wealth. The New Camp is a smaller group who broke away from the Old Camp. They have a plan to detonate the barrier and escape, and are not friendly with the Old Camp. They grow rice to eat and trade, but they also raid the Old Camp supplies that they get from the king. And then there's the Swamp Camp. They pray to their god the Sleeper for salvation, but mostly just hang out and enjoy smoking the swamp weed. They trade the swamp weed with other camps and work to create a generous and communal group. These three camps create a nuanced society, where each camp has a different mindset, amount of power, and strategy for getting by. The relationships between the camps feel natural, and there's a logical reason for their existence. But this only satisfies half of my definition. We also have to look at how the player is able to interact with the three factions. You start the game as a lowly newcomer, and your first order of business is to join one of the camps. By visiting each one, you get an immediate feel for their culture and attitude, and begin to learn how they all relate to one another. Each camp has a series of quests that you must complete to become a member. Once you join a camp, the rest of the story will take you on an adventure where you'll interact heavily with all three. You'll help the Swamp Camp with their religious practices, and be ordered to work in the New Camp's rice field, each one telling you a bit more about what life is like there. You'll also learn more just by walking around and interacting with people in a casual way. The guards at the Old Camp will demand protection money, and the gurus at the Swamp Camp will get offended if you speak to them directly. Everything that happens tells you something, so the game never has to resort to long blocks of exposition. It's a fantastic example of the classic rule, show don't tell. Now let's turn our attention to Fallout New Vegas, and see how it handles these issues in its own way. The game's three main factions are the NCR, the Legion, and Mr. House, who manages to be a critical enough character to be a faction all on his own. The NCR is the closest thing the Wasteland has to a government. They insist that the Wasteland would be a better place with them in charge, and seek to take control of the Mojave. They already control a large portion of the area, most importantly the Hoover Dam, which supplies electricity to the Wasteland. The Legion is a fascist group of slavers, who intend to take control of the Mojave through violence and terror. They aren't as powerful as the NCR, but they have plans to capture the Hoover Dam, which would give them a large amount of control over the Mojave. And then there's Mr. House. House is a powerful businessman who owns the New Vegas Strip. He controls the area with his army of robots and intends to gain power by upgrading their capabilities. He may be only one man, but House's influence is large enough to stand up to the NCR and the Legion. Instead of relying on a single main storyline, New Vegas uses individual quest lines to teach you about these factions. By doing one of the quest lines, you help one of the factions accomplish their goals and get a specific ending. Taking each path gives you a very different view of the world. The people you meet and the things you see line up with the camp you decide to side with, giving you a feel for what the world looks like through their eyes. This does mean that you'll have less of an understanding of the other two factions, but I love how it makes you feel like you're a part of a certain group. And the drastic differences in each questline also encourage multiple playthroughs, which can give you a new perspective on the world. Now, New Vegas does have some other groups that stand apart from the three main factions, like the Brotherhood, the Boomers, and the Followers, but I don't think these groups have the influence or scope to qualify as additional camps. These groups don't have the power to influence the entire Mojave the way the three main factions do. They keep to themselves for the most part and focus on their own goals, which are significantly smaller in scale. You may interact with them and explore their societies through quest lines, but their existence doesn't change the power struggle between the three main groups. At this point, I think we've established what the three-camp system is and how these two games go about implementing it, but we haven't addressed why it works so well when compared to other systems. What is it about creating a world with three core factions that allowed developers to create such a compelling society? Well, the most common alternative is the two-camp system, which you'll see across a majority of video games. Living versus Darkspawn, Horde versus Alliance, Link versus Ganon, good versus evil. It's so ubiquitous that you never really think of it as a two-faction system, but that's what it is. Two opposing sides vying for power to the exclusion of pretty much anything else. My big gripe with this system is that society is never that black and white, and centering an entire universe around one giant fight is never going to feel realistic. These games also tend to make one side the de facto good guys. It's the big bold heroes versus the faceless monsters. This has its place, but it doesn't relate to our real-life experiences. What these games are missing is that all-important third camp. The group of outsiders who don't care about the conflict between the first two groups, or at least have their own perspective on the whole thing. Fallout New Vegas isn't called Fight for the Hoover Dam because that isn't the only thing that matters to its world. And it's very hard to highlight this level of nuance when you only have two sides duking it out. But what if we added more factions? I mean, if 3 factions are better than 2, then what about 4 or 5? Well, unfortunately, a new set of problems start to come up when we add more and more groups. One of the biggest strengths of the 3-camp system is that there's plenty of time to explore the relationships between the 3 camps. When you have 3 groups, there are 3 different relationships that can be explored. 1 to 2, 1 to 3, and 2 to 3. This is far more than the single relationship you get with 2 camps, but still small enough for developers to fully explore and players to understand. However, as you start to add more and more factions, the number of relationships between them starts to increase dramatically. Just going from 3 to 4 doubles the number of relationships from 3 to 6, and if you have 5 factions, you'll have 10 relationships between them. This is what leads to the convoluted political mess you get in games with too many key groups. The writers don't have time to map it all out, and the players don't have the brain cells to keep it all straight. So many games think they're being deep and intriguing with their 12-house political structure, but all they're doing is creating a web of spaghetti that no one will ever understand. There's also just the sheer amount of work required to fully develop a single camp. Each one should be a living, breathing entity that has a major impact on the world and a large degree of interactivity. Bringing each one to life takes a massive amount of effort, and adding more would further split the developer's time. I don't think that going to 4 factions is the worst idea if the narrative really needs it, but in a majority of cases, it's just not worth it. And going beyond 4 is just asking for trouble. I feel like a lot of developers have a fundamental misunderstanding about what makes a world feel believable. So many turn to bells and whistles, like books full of history and intricate political battles, but none of that matters if the people and factions you interact with are dull and uninspired. History shouldn't be stuck in the past. It should happen right in front of the player. And politics shouldn't happen on the Senate floor. It should impact the lives and minds of every character you encounter. There are a number of ways to accomplish this, but the 3-camp system is one of the best. It pulls the politics and history out of the books and puts it into the people, giving you the opportunity to experience it all firsthand. The 3-camp system lets you witness the Legion's brutality, and feel House's watchful eye. It lets you appreciate the Swamp Camp's generosity, and fear the Old Camp's might. These games put you in the middle of it all. And always remember to show and not tell.